Imagine, if you will... No, stop. I'm afraid you're not concentrating, are you? Not quite yet. Still your mind. Still your mind and let it drift to a different place than where you are now. A place so serene and exquisite that you think it must be something out of a storybook, which, if you think about it, it is. Imagine a deep, lush, dark forest where life is teeming and souls are reborn. Spires of redwoods jut into a dream of a sky. It is green, redefined. And here are no city lights, so the spangle of stars flung across the black velvet sky are radiant. Never have you seen so many stars in a night sky. It is just past dusk in these woods. Crickets chirp, a hoot owl hoots. It is peaceful in the forest. It is peaceful in the house. And just for a moment, as we are passing through the woods, we play Peeping Tom in the window of a cozy cabin, rustic in its decor, so much so that we're not sure when this story is set. It might be the 20s, it might be the 1890s. It has a distinct Walton's Mountain feel to it. Surely they are all dressed the part, at least. Sitting on the latch-hook rug by the blazing fire in the fireplace are two adorable twins, about 7 years old, who are playing quietly with an attractive but exhausted-looking woman in her 30s. This is their mother, Eve. The old hound dog, Mr. Clampett, snores contentedly in his dog bed. In a rocker, telling the children a bedtime story, sits a plump old dark-skinned woman with an angelic face. Symphony, nicknamed Simmy. This is the children's nanny. The evening winds down, story hour ends, and the twins start to yawn. Eve and Simmy walk them upstairs and tuck them in snug and safe, only their little faces sticking out of their matching coverlets, like little burrito babies. Eve watches drowsily, happily, while Simmy soothes the children into a deep sleep with lullabies, as the beeswax candles burn down to nothing. Simmy says a prayer over the children, then the grown-ups retire for the evening. A glorious sunrise. Dawn floods into Eve's bedroom, awakening her more gently yet more effectively than any alarm clock. She yawns deliciously and steps onto a sweet little balcony that opens out into the woods. Eve smiles, loving this place, this time. And for a moment that is all too fleeting, she takes in the promising morning. Oh, enough of that. She leaves the balcony and breezes through the halls. This cabin, this house, is much bigger than we thought it was at first, last night, in the darkness, when we peeked through the windows at our little pioneers. Eve checks on her children, who are still sleeping soundly. Then she ambles downstairs into the kitchen. Simmy glances over her shoulder at Eve. She does not stop working her flapjacks. You overslept. I know, Simmy, but I was having the most delicious dream. Simmy looks at Eve, surprised. Sweet dreams, did I hear you say? Not bad dreams? No nightmares. Eve pulls on her old jacket and grabs a tattered duffel bag even as she is saying this. Apparently she is not staying for breakfast. Simmy hands Eve an apple and a banana. At least take these. Gotta eat something, Eve. And what do you want for dinner? Simmy, I've had a hankering for your mushroom barley soup. Unless, of course, this Indian summer heat wave stays through the night. Then I think some of your wonderful cold leek soup, with fresh chives from the garden, of course. Of course. And some of your fresh baked bread, of course. Of course. Eve is heading out the kitchen door, then stops and turns to Simmy. Oh, and remember about the bread. Pumpernickel if you make the mushroom barley, sourdough if you make the cold leek soup. Of course. Eve shuts the door behind her as Simmy mutters to herself. Don't I always put fresh chives when I make cold leek soup? And don't I know by now what bread goes with which soup? Oh, Lordy, Miss Eve. Lord, watch over her. I do worry. Luddites by Meg Langford. Lugging her backpack, Eve hurried inside a small shack near the house and emerged with a battered old bicycle that had obviously seen a lot of miles. She got on and started to pedal down the well-worn path, and as soon as she was a few yards into the woods, out of sight of the house, she pulled up her skirt, took a cell phone out of her boot, and talked to it. "Get me 404-4645. Eve waited a moment. Her phone connected her. "You set up the meeting, right? He's flying in as we speak, right?" Eve then listened for a split second, and then her face turned beet red with rage as she pedaled faster and faster. "You motherfucker, don't tell me no. You know how much money is on the line. Don't dare tell me you can't find him, you scum-sucking son of a bitch." The person on the other end was obviously trying to get a word in edgewise, but Eve was relentless. "Fuck you! I can't believe we're going to lose this whole deal because... What? Oh, man, when I get my hands on you, I'm going to... What? What? Don't dare tell me that. Don't you ever use that lousy excuse on me again, or you'll wish I'd fire you. I swear, Frank, you are so incompetent, it's evil." She hung up on him and, without missing a beat, dialed another number as she arrived at her destination. Another dwelling in the woods, in her woods. A modernistic gray cinder block structure, elegant in a postmodern sort of way. What an oxymoron Eve was, dressed like Whistler's grandmother, yet sticking her keys in the front door of the Frank Lloyd Wright creation. And as soon as she stepped in, Eve went into high gear. And we know immediately, we who are spying on Eve, playing Peeping Tom, remember last night? You remember last night, don't you? We who are the watchers realize that something is very wrong, or at least very weird. The decor inside the house matched the outside with simple, expensive appointments, lots of chrome and glass. Already Eve was engrossed in another conversation on her cell phone. "Look, cancel the morning shuttle call. Howard, tell him I'll take the meeting after all. Frank fucked up again. I swear, after I strangle him and they do the autopsy, they're going to discover a popcorn ball where his brain ought to be and Cadbury cream eggs instead of balls. He couldn't take on his paper boy." Eve was a tornado. During her tirade, she had taken the stairs 2 at a time, hurried to her bathroom, a very rich, silver, simple, almost male in decor, yanked off her clodhopper boots and high dark wool leggings, and whipped off her Whistler's grandmother clothes. "Yeah? Well, you've got exactly 45 seconds to get him on the line, or you will go the way of Frank." Eve put down the cell phone, jumped in the shower, raced through her toilette, and was out in 55 seconds. She yanked on her robe, grabbed the phone, and listened. "Oh, great. You tracked him down. Joan, you are a lifesaver. I'm sorry I threatened you before, but you know me. That's just my way of saying good morning. Always seems to get the blood flowing. Okay, yeah. See you in a few." Eve hung up, made yet another call as she whipped into her bedroom, the epitome of elegant, functional simplicity, and dressed, somehow never taking the phone away from her ear. And within minutes of entering the house, she was leaving it, dressed in a gray business suit, briefcase in one hand, laptop in the other, cell phone at her ear. She ran to the garage, jumped in a this year's model car, eased out of the driveway that adjoined the house, and cruised to work as a prominent Fortune 500 mover and shaker. Eve was still barking into the phone. "You tell him I'll scramble his brains and eat him with Tabasco for breakfast, then stuff his guts with his vital organs and sell them as half-smokes at that big-ass stadium he just bought if he so much as tries to touch my sports network." Eve was speeding her car down the country roads. Already the leaves had started to turn, and we the watchers, can see it is going to be a glorious fall. But Eve did not notice the stunning foliage because she was late for work, nor did she notice the disheveled vagrant with the intense eyes standing by the side of the road, staring at Eve in her car, and then gazing beyond to the 14-foot-high stone walls that separated her 2 houses from the rest of the world, from the real world. But That has all been just a bit much, hasn't it? I'm tired already just telling the story, and it's still very early in the morning, you remember, to be so exhausted. And so let us go back to that serene place where we were before, to the place that Eve calls Narnia, to that cozy A-frame in the woods. The children's bedroom looked like a set from a Shirley Temple movie, sweet, simple, circa 1930s. The toys were like something out of an antique store. The pictures were pastorals and a large oil painting of a guardian angel watching over children. Nothing to suggest the latter half of the 20th century. Not a single machine, no phone, no computer, no video games. Even the titles of the books on the shelf had been carefully selected. The children themselves looked like something out of a storybook. They both slept under comforters in flannel jammies. The girl had golden blonde hair. The boy had a riot of ringlets. Almost too cute to be, they were. They yawned synchronously as they toddled down the hall, each dragging a worn-out teddy bear. Simmy beamed as they padded into the kitchen and sat down at the kitchen table. She really loved these kids, as though they were her own. She beamed at them. "What are you two forgetting?" The twins jumped up and gave Simmy a big hug and kiss. Then a hot, nutritious breakfast. The twins were smacking their lips as Simmy served up pancakes with blueberries in the shape of smiling faces. Simmy helped them with the butter and the syrup, and suddenly little Mary pointed outside at the edge of the forest.
"Look, it's the mother deer and her fawn."
Simmy and Dirk both looked out the window. It was a perfect moment. But the drowsy peace of that morning had already vanished for Eve, who had now reached the city. The streets were crowded with rush hour, and suddenly all the oxymorons were gone. Eve now looked in her element. Now she was talking to a machine through her machine. "Oh, pick up the phone, you lard-ass coward, or I swear I'll drive to your house and find you. Ward, come on, you know I hate talking to your machine." "Oh, well, your hour will come. I know where you live. I even know where you hide your key. Remember that weekend I watered the plants and took care of your dog, huh? Ward, pick up, or I swear I'll sneak into your house while you sleep and cut that faggoty ponytail off while you snore." "Oh, well, I can see I'm not going to sweet-talk you into coming to the phone." And Eve hung up in a huff. The twins had both bathed, and Simmy was now braiding Mary's hair while Dirk laced up his boots, boots that were perfect for a romp in the deep woods, sturdy little boots, equal to any adventure he could imagine.
"What are we going to study today, Simmy?"
Simmy smiled as she tied 2 bright ribbons at the end of Mary's braids and turned to Dirk to straighten his suspenders. "In math, fractions, handwriting, we're going to study about how Oriental people write. Oh, it's beautiful, chickens, just like little artwork. In history, the Industrial Revolution. In geography, we have a picture book about the North Pole and the animals who live there. And during recitation, we have a contest to see which of you two did the best job of memorizing the Little Red Hen. And for book hour, we read Treasure Island." Dirk began jumping around excitedly.
"Oh, boy, Treasure Island!"
But Mary was deep in thought. She turned to Simmy.
"Simmy, that Oriental writing like they do in that book we looked at last week, do you suppose Mommy would take us there if we asked her? To the Orient?"
Simmy's smile faded. "Well, let's worry about learning the language first. That'll take a while. And you wouldn't want to go to another country without being able to say please and thank you and where's the bathroom and could I have another piece of pie in their own language, now would you?"
"No, Simmy."
"Well, then why don't you not worry right now about visiting some strange place? Let's just concentrate on fractions and polar bears and catching lunch in the pond, okay?" And with that, Mary's thoughts of leaving the compound vanished, but Simmy still had a sad, worried look on her face. Yes, Eve was still at it as she turned off the bustling street into the parking garage in her building, barking into her cell phone. Joan, it's Evelyn. Yeah, I heard about what happened yesterday after I left. Look, you get Kevin's ass into my office by noon, and then I want you to look in the yellow pages under executioner. See if you can find one of those ones like the one that beheaded Anne Boleyn. You know, the ones that wear all black and a velvet cowl with one of those axes that stands as tall as a man with a nice sharp blade. No, wait. No, for Kevin, better yet. Ask them if they have any dull blades sitting around. And then suddenly Eve looked over and saw the old black security guard, Reedy Johnson, sitting on his chair by the elevator. She hung up, jumped out of her car, and ran to give him a big hug. Reedy, there you are. I missed you. Bill said you had the flu real bad.
Yes, ma'am. It's this odd weather.
But Eve cut him off before he could finish. Reedy Johnson, sit back down. You still look a bit pale. And don't you move. I've got a surprise for you. Eve opened the car trunk. Reedy, I was so worried. I was going to come to your house today and check on you. I made you a big batch of chicken and dumplings. Oh, best thing in the world if you have the flu and, you're just getting over it. She handed him a huge crock pot. And don't worry about the pot, just keep it. Oh, no, don't get up, Reedy. You're still sick. I also have something else for you. Eve pulled out a bulky package wrapped in brown paper with a bow. I was saving this for you till Christmas, but I figured, what the hey, you're down here till all hours, and you're never dressed warmly enough. Here, Reedy, put it on. He unwrapped it. A big, cozy sweater. He smiled and put it on. Perfect fit. Eve beamed. Oh, Reedy, don't you look fine in that? And so toasty warm. Oh, here, I had some extra yarn, so I figured, what the heck. She pulled out an Angora comforter and draped it around him. He smiled, chuckling.
Miss Eve, I swear, you're too good to me.
Oh, no, I don't do enough. I figure, well, you're a guard. As far as I can see, that's one of the 3 most important jobs in the modern world. And don't you think I see how other people treat you like a dog, or what's worse, act like you don't even exist? I hate that shit. Oh, excuse me for swearing, Reddy. I know you don't like that. Anyway, I've got to go. And Eve was back to her old self on the executive elevator and barking into her cell phone. What? Don't you dare tell me that. If he so much as... You tell him I will cut off his nuts, bread him, deep fry him, and eat him like prairie oysters with a good, robust, dark beer. That fucker! And so this strangest of families made their way through their day, and the vagrant, high in a tree just outside the estate, armed with binoculars, scoped and spied and studied everything the children did. For hours he observed them. Fascinated he was. It was more like peering into another time than peeking over high stone walls. He watched as the darling twins spent an idyllic day with sweet old Simmy doing their lessons. Just your basic reading, writing, arithmetic. No machines, no gadgets, no calculators, no keyboards, just pencil and paper. And then they went fishing in the pond, into the woods for lunch, then arts and crafts, a nap, and then music lessons. As, meanwhile, in the big city, the ruthlessly competent Eve, Evelyn, as she was known in her corporate incarnation, made mega deals, took power meetings, fired the office cokehead, barked into cell phones, speakerphones, etc., deftly handling the most high-tech toys with the best of them, even if no such toys or gadgets were allowed in her home, in her fortress. Finally, the late afternoon was rolling in, and Eve was so looking forward to getting out of the high-rise and back to the high stone walls, to the sanctity and sanity they afforded her. Eve was talking on the phone as she fiddled with her computer, then cursed as she spun around too fast in her chair and got a run in her stockings. She opened a desk drawer and grabbed her spare pair as her secretary's voice came over the speakerphone.
Evelyn, I just got through to Crenshaw, and he okayed a meeting.
Oh, Joan, you are a miracle worker.
Hold on. He insisted on O'Keefe's. He wants to meet you there in an hour.
Damn it, not O'Keefe's. Joan, you know how much I hate that place.
Evelyn, I tried, but O'Keefe is just down the elevator from his office. It's the only place he'd agree to meet you on such short notice.
Okay. In her outer office, Joan stared at the speakerphone as she heard Eve click it off, wondering what it was about O'Keefe's that Eve hated so much. An hour later, Eve was walking through the mall, staring straight ahead, not the least bit interested in the lavish window displays, the new stores opening, the hubbub of life all around her. She walked like a horse with blinders, almost as though she was afraid to see anything but her goal, the bright neon O'Keefe sign over the upscale bar at the far end of the mall. And then it started. The sounds of gunshots, rifle reports, laser guns from the video arcade next to O'Keefe's. At the first few sounds, he winced and flinched like Ron Bourne on the 4th of July Kovic at his homecoming parade, bracing himself against the fireworks that brought those hellish flashbacks of Vietnam violence. Then, as the sounds increased and Eve's periphery caught the flashing lights and annoying sound effects of the various machines, Eve collapsed onto a nearby bench. Then, as the whoops and yells of the happy kids just paroled from a long day of high school got louder, they sounded to Eve more like screams and epithets and agony and cries for help. Suddenly, Eve jumped up from the bench and ran to a nearby bathroom. She hurried into a stall near hysteria, oblivious of the other ladies who saw this madwoman and hurried out of the John. Eve slammed a stall door and fell apart, sobbing and putting her hand against her head like someone with a fierce migraine. But in Eve's case, it was a fierce memory she could not shake. Moments later, Eve emerged from the bathroom stall, collecting herself. She splashed water on her face, then strode out the door, past the arcade and into her meeting. Eve shook hands with her colleague. He noticed she was visibly rattled. She was rattled through the whole meeting, shaky when she left, because the violent sounds of the arcade always drifted into O'Keefe's pub. So rattled was Eve all through her drive home, in fact, that she did not notice the shaggy vagrant still there, tracking her homecoming, Eve's every movement. First into the 21st century silver gray modernistic house, then her transformation from Evelyn to Eve, then mounting that battered old bike and pedaling down the path to the cozy wooden A-frame. All of this the vagrant watched through binoculars, fascinated. The vagrant was still watching the next morning when, after Eve had left, following her usual strange ritual, the twins left with Simmy and walked out of the estate, through the gates, over a hill covered with wildflowers, through a dream of a meadow where tame deer did not bound away at the approach of humans. Simmy and the twins walked together, not into the real world exactly, but to a nearby Amish community. And now, dear reader, now I think you're finally concentrating a bit more than before. So, see with your mind's eye. Imagine. Peer into this idyllic world as the twins and a cluster of cute little Amish children spend a low-tech, no-tech day. They learn how to shear sheep and weave wool on an old-fashioned loom. And as you watch this, listen carefully and you can hear a small girl's voice spelling a word haltingly.
Luddite, workmen in England who rioted in 1811. They wrecked machinery to which they attributed prevailing unemployment and low wages. Named for Ned Ludd, who 30 years before destroyed knitting machines. The Columbia Encyclopedia. But jerk yourself out of that daydream, back to work. Work. The office. What a slap in the face! Eve was having an all-out war with her computer, which was on the fritz, as she barked into her cell phone, which wasn't working either, as, for a brief moment, these two worlds merge. They blend like the beans in a perfect cup of coffee, and as we spy on Eve's office angst, we hear a little boy reciting from his book. Luddite, a member of an organized band of English blokes who set themselves to destroy all machinery in England. Hence, Luddites Luddism. Oxford English Dictionary.
And through this long but perfect little day, sweet old Simmy chatted with the Amish ladies as they tended to chores. And Simmy kept thinking to herself, Lord, they got no idea what the real world is like. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, only Solomon could say. That night, there was a tremendous thunderstorm. No problem for our little family of Luddites who were safe in their castle, once again in front of the roaring fire, telling ghost stories and making popcorn. But outside the castle, the vagrant had decided to find out what was behind those high stone walls. And though they were high and formidable, he scaled them with the skill of a Navy SEAL, which he once was. Within minutes, he was on her property, setting up a campsite, making himself right at home. And Eve knew nothing of this intrusion into her world. She was sound asleep. Moonlight poured in the window on her lovely sleeping form as her psyche slipped into a deep dream. Eve's dream. The flowers are technicolor, every color of the rainbow. The sky is blue, the clouds are fluffy white, a perfect day. Eve's twins come bounding into a field. Mary is dressed as a fairy princess. Dirk is dressed as a cowboy, one of the good guys with a white hat and white leather chaps. They come upon a tea party, very Alice in Wonderlandish, attended by all manner of characters in costumes. There are pirates and mermaids, genies and oriental princesses, superheroes and cartoon characters, rabbits and cats, children dressed as grown-ups, grown-ups dressed as children. A feast of the imagination, a treat for the eyes. And as the dream state deepens, each character takes on more of the characteristics of its costume. The mermaid is suddenly swimming about in a lush underwater garden. The superheroes fly through the air. The genie makes things appear and disappear. A real-life cowboy on a horse approaches Eve's little boy, and he has a pony for Dirk to ride. The cowboy helps Dirk onto the pony, as nearby, Mary the princess is walking through the field, the grass magically parting for her. She comes upon an ornate throne, seats herself, and the costume characters around her all kneel. But her brother is riding circles around the cotillion, swinging his lasso above his head. He sees a bird, which he deftly lassos. But once he has it, he sees the bird has turned into an angel, which strains at the lasso to free itself, screaming in agony. The little princess in her throne screams for her brother to let it go, so he drops the rope, and the angel frees itself. The little princess cries out to the angel, who is looping and swooping above her, "Oh, take me with you, angel! You are so beautiful!" And then the angel holds out her arms to take the little princess. The angel speaks, and when she does, it sounds like bells tinkling. "Come with me, little princess. I will teach you how to fly." The angel scoops Mary into her arms and starts to fly up to the clouds, her lovely feathery wings carrying them upward. When suddenly Dirk, the good guy, the cowboy, stares up in horror. "No! Put my sister down!" But the little princess is having a wonderful time. "No, Dirk, don't command her. I don't want the angel to put me down. Look at me. I'm flying." But Dirk is terrified because of what is happening to his sister. "Bring my sister back or I'll shoot." And with that, the little cowboy draws his gun from the holster and aims it at the angel. And when we look back to the angel, we see it has changed, morphed. It is the angel of death. We realize that it is what it was all along, just wickedly disguised. Its white raiments have turned to black robes, its halo to a dark cowl, its radiant face to a skull. It laughs wickedly as it clutches the little princess, who screams and struggles, now seeing the angel of death for what it truly is. The little cowboy has his finger on the trigger, and as he is about to shoot, the angel of death reaches into its robes, pulls out a sawed-off shotgun, killing the cowboy, who falls off his pony onto the grass, his shirt blood-soaked. The little princess, still in the arms of the angel of death, screams and struggles as it carries her away, the costumed characters waving goodbye, some screaming, some simply taking tea. Such is the bizarre and horrible nature of nightmares. Eve sat up in bed screaming from her nightmare. Her scream carried through the deep woods, waking all the sleeping creatures and the vagrant, who was just managing to fall asleep in spite of the fierce thunderstorm raging. He sat bolt upright. Back in the house, Simmy awoke with a start. She dashed down the hall to Eve's room and shook her gently. "Honey, you had another nightmare." Eve looked around frantically, trying to orient herself. "Oh, Simmy, I had the most horrible dream, that my poor babies were—" "Shh! Don't say another word. It's bad juju. Your babies are fine, sound asleep in their beds." "But my screaming must have wakened them. Simmy, go check on them, please. I don't want them to see me like this." "I'm sure they're fine, honey, but I'll go. You just try to collect yourself." "Hurry, Simmy." As Simmy hurried down the dark hall, Eve clutched her knees and sobbed. "Damn it, damn it, damn it!" Then Eve slipped down the hall and watched from the shadows as Simmy whispered her magic to the twins, soothing them. Eve was careful to make sure they did not see her. She did not want them to see their mother shaking and crying, terrified from her nightmare. But by the next morning, Eve and Simmy and the twins and the dog, Mr. Clampett, were back to their usual, if bizarre, routines. Eve was driving to work. As country roads turned to suburbia, she scanned the front yards all festooned with ghoulish Halloween decorations. Agitated, she snapped on the radio. A bebop station was playing Spooky. Eve scowled, changed the station. Monster Mash. She snapped it off, muttering. It was a little past 9 in the morning, and the city streets were bustling. Eve walked out of a shop carrying a wrapped gift. En route to her office, she passed by storefronts, all decorated for Halloween. Eve hated Halloween. Worst day of the year. Worst day of her life. But back in Narnia, the morning had flown by, and it was the twins' play hour. Today's studies had all focused on the American Indian. History, culture, lifestyles, poetry, and songs, even an Indian lunch. And now the twins were both dressed as Indians, complete with headdresses. They squirmed excitedly as Simmy painted their faces. Dirk looked in the mirror and smiled at Simmy's artistry.
What kind of Indians are we? Shawnee, Mohawk, Navajo?
Well, Dirk, you're your own kind of Indian. You're a white Indian.
But Simmy, chirped Mary, I didn't know there were any white Indians.
Well, I've heard it said there's a first time for everything.
Guess what, Simmy? Mary and I are going to try walking like Indians. Remember, like the story you read?
Mary smiled and nodded, struggling with a word.
Yeah, noiselessly.
Simmy howled at the thought. You two, noiseless? Well, that'll be the day.
We figure if we can walk through the forest without making a sound, we might be able to catch an animal. Maybe a baby deer or a rabbit. Simmy, if we catch a rabbit, can we keep it as a pet?
That I'd like to see. Okay, if you're fast enough. If you two can catch a rabbit, yes, you can keep it as a pet. The twins cheered. Back in the other world, in the real world, Eve was throwing a baby shower for Joan. Pink and blue streamers festooned the outer office. Eve, in party hat, was in a rare good mood as she peeked out the door and ordered everyone to hide. Joan walked in with her yogurt lunch, and at that instant, everyone jumped out and yelled, "Surprise!" People in that office were going to have some fun for a change. Back in the enchanted woods, the twins were creeping through the forest, amazingly quiet for a pair of 7-year-olds.
Mary, where do you think we'll find a rabbit or a baby deer or even a raccoon? Oh, I'd love a pet raccoon, Dirk, but I don't know where they hide.
Meanwhile, not too far away, under the footbridge that crossed the babbling brook, the vagrant was sitting, listening to a Walkman, headphones clamped over his ears. He did not hear the twins approach. Dirk spied him first.
Hey, Mary, do you see that? Yeah, what is it? Don't you know? I know what it is. Remember Simmy's story? Yeah, you really think that's what it is? Well, what else could it be? What are we going to do? Should we try and catch it?
And then Mary stepped on a twig and snapped it. Suddenly the vagrant whirled around, a fierce and terrified look in his eyes like a wounded animal. He relaxed when he saw it was the twins, who had run to hide behind a tree. They peeked out. The vagrant smiled. "Hello?"
Hello.
Joe, the vagrant, laughed in spite of himself at the two tiny faces peeking out from behind the tree. "Don't be afraid, kids."
Why shouldn't we be afraid of you? We're supposed to be afraid of you.
Really? And why's that?
'Cause you're the troll under the bridge that eats children.
Again, Joe, the vagrant, couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, you see, I'm a troll, of course, but I'm not that kind of troll. I'm what you call a vegetarian troll."
What's that?
"Well, that's a troll that just lives on nuts and berries, sweetgrass, things like that he finds in the woods."
But I thought all trolls ate little children. Simmy said so in her story, and I've never known Simmy to be wrong.
The vagrant smiled at Mary. She was an adorable child. "May I ask your name, miss?"
Mary, she announced proudly, after the Mother of God and the Queen of England. So Mom says I got two things going for me right off the bat.
I like your mom already. Well, Mary, you're partly right. Trolls eat little children. They used to. But when I got older, I found eating children gave me terrible indigestion. Their bones lodged in my throat, their hair stuck in my gullet and in my mouth. Have you ever had a hair in your food? Ever swallowed a hair? The kids had forgotten their fears. They were fascinated by Joe, staring at him intently.
Yeah, said Dirk. One time I was eating my oatmeal and I took a bite and something funny was in my mouth. I pulled it out and it was one of Mary's hairs. Ew. I don't know how Mary's hair got on my oatmeal, but it was very nasty, long and curly in my throat. It stayed there, too. I couldn't get it out the whole morning. Oh, that's nothing. One time I was eating this apple salad at dinner, and one of Mom's hairs and Simmy's hairs both got into it. It was very unpleasant.
Joe threw his head back and laughed at her phraseology. It sounds like the folks in your house shed a lot. But if you thought that was unpleasant, imagine eating a child and getting a whole head full of hair. And the bones get stuck and... Well, let me tell you, when you eat a fat little boy or girl, it bloats you up like Thanksgiving dinner and you feel awful. Did you ever eat too much at a meal and felt like you were going to be sick?
You bet, said Dirk. Last month at our birthday dinner, it nearly ruined our party.
Oh, you just had a birthday. Well, congratulations. How old were you?
We both turned 7. We're twins.
I can see that. Anyway, that's why I don't eat little children anymore.
Oh, that's a load off my mind. I was a little nervous when I first saw you. You know what? Dirk piped up. I'm not sure you're a troll at all, mister. With those scraggly whiskers of yours, you look like the fathers of the Amish children we play with twice a month.
Oh, that's interesting. You're allowed out... I mean, that is, you go to play with the Amish children over the hill?
Couple days a month. It's really fun because Dirk and I get really lonely sometimes playing here by ourselves. It gets really boring. But we don't complain to Mom because she's sad so much.
Oh, and you two never go out at all? You always stay behind these walls protect you?
That's right. Mom says the walls protect us from all things evil.
Joe was caught off guard at this. All things evil?
Yeah, we read about all things evil in books sometimes.
You read about it in books sometimes. And then Joe brightened. What about TV? Do you ever see evil on TV and that upsets you? The twins stared at him quizzically.
What's TV, that thing you said?
Oh, said the vagrant, more to himself than the twins. Tell me, kids, what does your dad do for a living?
Oh, he isn't alive anymore. He died in the Great War against violence.
A great war against violence. Well, that's very rich indeed. So tell me, kids, what do you do all day? No, let me guess. No video games, no computers, no CD-ROMs or Saturday matinees. I bet even no skateboarding. The twins looked at Joe like he was speaking a foreign language.
Gee, mister, you talk funny.
Joe found this very comical. Well, Mary, you're hardly the first person to make that observation, trust me.
Mary giggled. But I like it. Talk more, Mr. Troll.
Now, you are the first person to say that to me, little miss. But what I was asking you before, what do you two do all day? I mean, what's a normal day like for you?
Well, it's pretty fun.
Except when it's not. So far, I can relate.
Well, first we wake up and have breakfast, but we don't eat nuts and berries and sweetgrass like you.
And after thinking about this, Mary even giggled at the thought. But Joe was thinking about food, a real home-cooked breakfast. I bet you kids have hot cakes and sausage links, huh? Bacon and eggs? Oh no, ham and cheese omelets. Oh, my stomach is growling just at the thought.
Mr. Troll, what's that stuff you said? Talk so we can understand you, Mr. Troll.
Sorry, Mary.
Anyway, sometimes we have hotcakes, but mostly oatmeal.
Great. Gruel. Oliver Twist. Sorry, kids. Pray do continue. Mary moved closer to Joe, flirting with him as only a 7-year-old girl can.
Anyway, then we have lessons for a few hours. You know, reading and writing and arithmetic.
Joe the vagrant was shaking his head in disbelief at the Pollyannaism of it all.
And then we have lunch and more lessons. Yeah, history. That's my favorite.
The glorious history of the Great War against violence, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. And then we have arts and crafts, which is my favorite, and then play hour, and Simmy lets us run around in the woods and do whatever we like.
Simmy, that's your mom?
No. Her real name is Symphony. Isn't that a pretty name? But we call her Simmy. She's our teacher and our storyteller, and she takes care of us while Mom goes to work.
Oh, I see. And where does your mom work?
Outside the stone walls.
Oh, and what does your mom do?
She transfers energy.
This, the vagrant did not expect. He was thrown for a loop. Transfers energy. Oh, I get it. She works for the power company.
Yeah, I guess that's where she works, 'cause we heard Simmy saying once that Mother works for a very powerful company.
Oh, what does your mom do for that company?
Stocks and bonds, once she said, talking to Simmy at night. Yeah, Simmy and Mom talk really quiet a whole lot, every night practically.
And then the three of them fell quiet. Joe just sat there trying to fathom it, but Mary was studying him carefully, looking him up and down.
Mr. Troll, how come today's the first time we saw you here? Did you come from outside the stone walls? Yeah, said Dirk, suddenly seeing an opportunity. What's it like out there, beyond the high stone walls?
Joe was caught off guard. Suddenly, they heard Simmy calling them from the back porch.
Oh, Oh, it's Simmy,
said Dirk, jumping up and brushing himself off.
Play hour is up. It's time for us to go in. Time for arts and crafts. We're going to make a little Indian village with teepees and everything.
Joe was genuinely disappointed. Oh, I guess if you kids really have to go in.
Yeah, and wait till Simmy hears we found a real live troll under the bridge.
But Joe's amusement and fascination at the twins turned to panic. No, you can't do that. You can't tell Simmy or anybody for that matter. I mean, anybody that you saw me here.
How come?
Because surely Simmy told you it's a well-known fairy tale fact that if little children utter a troll's name, tell grown-ups where a troll is hiding, speaking that troll's name will cause the troll to disappear into the mist for all time. Mary cocked her head and studied Joe.
You sure about that, Mr. Troll? Simmy never told us that about trolls, and since she knows just about everything there is to know about fairy tales and legends, I'm sure she'd have said that.
Yeah, like saying your name making you disappear. Joe groped for an explanation. She's a grown-up. How do you expect Simmy to know all of the rules about trolls and such? Fairy tales live in the imagination of children, not grown-ups. Well, surely you trust a troll's words on what's what more than a grown-up. Simmy had come outside and was calling for them again.
Oops, now we really gotta go. But Mr. Troll, do you suppose you could come play with us again tomorrow? We get bored, just the two of us, with no other kids to play with. Except the Amish kids twice a month.
And to tell the truth, Mr. Troll, they're pretty boring too. So what do you say, meet us tomorrow?
Maybe you know some new stuff to do that Mary and me and Simmy haven't thought of yet.
Joe gave them a searching look and a sad smile. Sure, I'll be here, hiding under the bridge, like today.
Oh, boy, I can hardly wait.
But remember, kids, not a word about me to the grown-ups, or I can pretty much guarantee that I'll vanish without a trace. And Joe watched, smitten, as Dirk and Mary skipped back through the woods to the house. Joan's baby shower was winding down. Everyone was pleasantly surprised that Eve had gone to so much trouble and expense to surprise her secretary. So changeable, that Eve, such a chameleon. She'd bite your head off one minute, then turn around and loan you 4 figures or give you shares of stock without skipping a beat. One day she'd threatened to fire you, or worse, the next day she'd knitted you a sweater or whipped up a loaf of banana bread for everybody in the office. Well, everyone was sugar-buzzed from the cake and the punch. Talk had turned to Halloween and the costumes everybody's kids would wear. "Anne," said Joan, putting her presents back in their boxes, "what are your kids going to be for Halloween? Didn't they get a prize last year for their costumes?" "Yes, all 3 of them went as the Headless Horseman, but they made me promise not to say what they're going to be this year. They're afraid someone will steal their idea. The prize is up to $1,000. Those kids of yours are so competitive." Ever so subtly, Eve's demeanor was changing from casual to tense and irritable. She was not joining in the conversation or the laughter. "What are your kids going as, Lynn?" This from Bob, who was wiping a blob of lavender icing from his tie. "Oh, the usual. The latest Disney movie. One's going as that lovable little tarantula from the new Desert Adventure movie, and the other one is going as Pedro Penguin from that other Disney movie, very far south of the border." "Yeah," said Howard, "but the problem with those store-bought costumes is half the kids on the block look alike. My kids make their own. Steve is doing the alien bit, lots of tinfoil and holographic stickers, and, well, Tina, she's getting cuter every day. She made a unicorn costume with her little lavender leotard from dance class, a tail, a mane, a little horn. Oh, she's so precious, precious." Joan was now carefully folding the wrapping paper for reuse. She turned to Eve, still chuckling over Howard's story. Eve, what about your kids? Do they do anything for Halloween at that fancy private school they go to? Where is it? Upstate New York? Eve was tense, fighting to maintain control. No, actually, they're not into that sort of thing. But then Bob took center stage. Oh, you should see my kids. You know how kids come up with the craziest ideas? Well, Josie gets it into her head she wants to go as a taco. So Joy, oh, she's great with the kids. She took an old cushion from the wicker pool chairs and she dyed it cornmeal yellow. And then she folded it around the kid like a soft taco shell, you know? Bob started cackling as he talked, and his funny mule-like laugh made everyone else cackle, too. And then she cuts these orange vinyl strips for cheese, and she made hunks of tomato from red foam rubber. I swear, the kid looks like a taco. The staff was in hysterics, everybody but Eve. Suddenly she snapped. Very cute, but could we please get back to work? After all, this is a brokerage, not a PTA meeting. Everyone stared at Eve's outburst. Then bristling partiers left the office. Eve felt badly for a moment, especially because of the way Joan was looking at her as she gathered her shower gifts. But mostly, Eve was dreading the memories that came back every year at this holiday, flooding in a torrent she couldn't control. Eve hurried into her own office and slammed the door, shutting her eyes, gritting her teeth, and preparing herself for the onslaught. While 40 floors below, unbeknownst to Eve, Joe the Vagrant was hurrying down the street with big plans to buy gifts for her kids. He spent the next couple of hours scrounging for money so he could get toys for the twins. And something was powering him. Something more than just meeting the twins was motivating him to do something for these children. His plan was simple. For one single day, he would revert from his pioneer persona. For you see, only by thinking of himself this way could he bear his own homelessness. By fancying himself a loner, a vagabond, a mountaineer, any word that made having lost the roof over his head and the home he so loved bearable. But for today, Joe would operate much as an urban vagrant would. He found a shopping cart and foraged dumpsters for recyclables. He wheeled his trash to a recycling center and got what cash he could. It wasn't as much as he hoped for, but it was a start. And then, Joe, usually too proud to panhandle, lowered himself. And by the afternoon, Joe was hunkered down by a tree in a pretty park, counting his take. Enough for some toys. Joe was smiling like a kid himself. He was proud and excited. Meanwhile, 40 floors up, Eve skulked from her office into the outer office, still feeling bad about her outburst. Joan, I'm leaving now because I've got that afternoon flight to catch. I won't be available all weekend. Joan eyed Eve coolly. Fine, I'll manage. Eve looked at Joan, who was just starting to show. Then, impulsively, Eve went over to Joan and hugged her very sincerely. Joan, honey, I'm so sorry about before. Joan looked at Eve, taken aback. Eve was crying. And Joan, I'm so happy for you. Babies are life renewing itself. And with that, Eve was out the door. Joan stared after her, shaking her head at her moody, mysterious chameleon of a boss. Eve hurried out the front door of the building and walked by Joe without even noticing him. Homeless people were invisible to Eve, urban camouflage. To her, they just blended into the rest of the dirt and the bustle. If only Eve knew how closely their lives, her life and Joe's life, would become bound up together. Joe did not notice her either, though. He was trotting briskly down the street, and a few minutes later, standing outside of a spanking new mega-mall, sizing it up like it was a fortress to be stormed. He ambled in, staring up in awe at the high ceilings, the ultra-modern decor, the inviting store windows. It was obvious that it had been a long time since Joe had been in an environment like this. So amazed was he by what he saw that he forgot to notice how pathetically shabby and out of place he was amongst the upscale shoppers until a security guard approached. "Sorry, mister, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Joe was caught off guard. "Look, I'm not bothering anybody. I'm not panhandling. See, I have money." "Sorry, pal, but this is private property." "But I just want to buy some toys." "Look, we got rules, and there's this policy. Vendors reserve the right to refuse service to... Well, they don't want your kind." "My kind?" barked Joe, indignant. "What fucking kind do you mean? You mean the kind who got laid off from his job of 10 years because he was told they were downsizing and he was no longer economically viable? Look, friend, it's nothing personal. Or do you mean the kind who spent a fucking year trying to get a job to pay enough to keep a roof over his family's head and kept getting told he was overqualified? Is that the kind that you're talking about?" "Look, calm down. We got rules, and I got a job to do. Well, I've got 30 economically viable fucking dollars to spend. Just, look, let me spend them, and I'll be on my way." "Hey, you are not going any further into this mall. Now, let's not get ugly. Well, obviously, you already think I look pretty ugly, because if you knew who I really was, you'd salute me, not insult me." The paunchy old guard had given up trying to persuade Joe and was going for his walkie-talkie weapon.
"Roy, I've got a 311 here on level 1. I need backup."
"Oh, stop with that. What are you, Barney Fife? Look, I get your message, but let me tell you something, pal. I was a Navy SEAL, and if I wanted to storm your little shopping arcade, your Goober and Gomer backup sure as hell couldn't stop me." And then a couple of other bubbas, one fat, one skinny, approached Joe from behind and each grabbed an arm. Big mistake. Acting on instinct and training, Joe reacted with a Navy SEAL's lightning reflexes and did a ballet of violence that leveled all 3 guards. Then Joe realized what he had done and bolted out of the mall, past the shocked crowd. Back at Eve's fortress, Simmy was following Eve around as she packed. In the next room, the twins were playing happily, and when Eve spoke, it was in low tones. "Okay, Simmy, you're okay with my going away a couple of days?" "No, I am not." "All right, Simmy, let me rephrase that. I know you're not okay with my doing this, but I intend to go, and I just want to know if you've got any questions before I do." Simmy put her hands on her hips. "Don't, Eve. I hate it when you talk to me like I'm one of your employees. I'm above being talked to that way, and for what it's worth, you're above talking to me like that." "And you're above judging me, Simmy, damn it." Simmy was taken aback. She raised her eyebrows, and Eve demurred. "I'm sorry, Simmy. I know you hate it when I swear at you. Simmy, it's just that what I am going to do is the most natural thing in the world. I mean, don't you think not going would be a sign something was wrong?" Simmy looked at Eve with sad old eyes. "Eve, I'm not against your doing this. I never have been. You know that. In your place, I'd do the same thing." "Well, Simmy, then why are you always..." "I'm against you doing it by yourself, Eve. Grief ought to be shared, not hoarded. What's that old saying? A grief shared is half a grief. A joy shared is twice a joy." Eve snorted cynically. "And just who would I share my grief with, Simmy? The only person I could share my grief with is... Well, tell me, grief or joy? Who would I share it with?" "Well, nobody. There's not going to be nobody to share it with if you keep locking out the world the way you do." "Don't start with me, Simmy. You know I hate it when you do. And doing it this week of all weeks, it's just plain cruel." "Eve, you know I wouldn't hurt you for the world. Well, that's why I've come with you through everything, to try and protect you and those twins. But it's the same reason I disapprove of your going off by yourself. Don't take this wrong, Eve, but you are still fragile, much more than you realize." Eve shut her suitcase and fumbled with the lock. "Don't be silly. I'll be fine." Sure you will, and I'll tell the twins the usual lies. Eve brushed by Simmy and went into the twins' bedroom to say goodbye. She gave them both a good, strong hug as Simmy watched, worried. And poor old Joe sat slumped by a dumpster, looking more pathetic than he ever had. A rat ran over his foot. Garbage was strewn all around him. Joe pulled a battered wallet from his pocket and pulled out an old time-worn picture of two little children sitting next to a pretty young woman. Oh, they looked nothing like the twins, but still, the twins reminded him so of... Where were they now? What had happened to them?